I got an email a few days ago from a man named Paul Warren. He said he wanted to share a story, not to prove I'm right, he wrote, but to remind people what dignity still looks like, even when it's been laughed at. Paul is 64. He used to run financial strategies on Wall Street, the kind of man who could shift markets with a single phone call. But after a bitter divorce and a public collapse, he disappeared. His friends thought he'd gone broke. His ex-wife said he'd finally learned humility. In truth, Paul hadn't lost everything. He'd just stopped showing what he had. He quietly moved to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, a place where nobody cared about last names or hedge fund headlines. He rented a modest service apartment near KLCC, ate street food with construction workers, and found peace in the soft rhythm of a city that never asked questions. That's where he met Elena. She was brilliant, confident, younger by 2 decades, the kind of woman who made rooms tilt toward her. To her, Paul was just another retired expat, polite, harmless, irrelevant. She liked his calmness, but she also pitied him a little. She'd laugh and call him old soul, and he'd smile, never correcting her. Over the months, they grew close. But beneath Elena's charm was hunger, a hunger for power, for deals, for recognition. She spoke of mergers, clients, and billion-dollar men as if they were chess pieces. Paul listened quietly, sipping his coffee, never mentioning that one of those billion-dollar companies, Harmony Holdings, was actually his. What began as companionship would soon twist into humiliation, and then into something colder, sharper, a quiet kind of revenge. Not the kind you plan with anger, but the kind life hands you when pride collides with truth. This is Paul Warren's story, told in his own words, about how a single glass of wine, poured in mockery, became the most poetic justice he could ever imagine. When I left New York, I didn't say goodbye to anyone. Not my colleagues, not my ex-wife, not even the doorman who had greeted me every morning for 15 years. I packed 2 suitcases, shut the door of my penthouse, and took a one-way flight to Kuala Lumpur, a city I'd only seen once during a business trip, back when I still thought money could fix anything that I was 64, retired, or at least pretending to be. The tabloid said I'd lost everything in my second divorce. They weren't entirely wrong. My ex-wife took the Hamptons house, my art collection, and half my pride. But she never found what I'd hidden. Harmony Holdings, the company I built quietly under layers of trusts and offshore subsidiaries. The world thought I was finished. I wanted them to think that I in Kuala Lumpur, no one cared about my past. I rented a 2-bedroom condo near KLCC, facing the silver twins of the Petronas Towers. My mornings were slow, kopi panas from the corner cafe, long walks through Bukit Bintang, where the smell of roasted chestnuts and fried noodles hung heavy in the air. I had spent 40 years chasing numbers. Now I was learning to count time differently, by sunsets, not stock prices, and tea first. I felt weightless. Nobody here knew who I was. I could blend into the crowd, another aging expat in a linen shirt, camera around my neck, pretending to have all the time in the world. But the silence also had a sting. For the first time in decades, no one needed me to decide anything. One night, I found myself at a wine bar near Jalan Raja Chulan, the kind of place with jazz playing too softly and glasses too expensive for what they poured. That's where I met Elena. She was 38, sharp, confident, and radiant in a way that drew attention without asking for it. She sat 2 tables away, arguing on her phone in fast, clipped English. Something about closing a Southeast Asian merger and clients who don't understand the numbers. I remember thinking how alive she sounded, impatient, certain, full of that restless ambition I used to feed on. When her call ended, she caught me looking. I smiled politely. She smiled back. That's how it began that we talked about travel, food, and how both of us had escaped something. She said she'd moved from Singapore to Kuala Lumpur for work, consulting for a regional finance firm managing a massive $700 million merger. It's going to redefine the region, she said, eyes sparkling. Harmony Holdings is one of the key players. My fingers tightened around my glass. Harmony Holdings? I repeated, yes. Do you know them? She asked. I've heard of them, I said, smiling faintly. Big company. She nodded, proud. They're a beast. Men who run that kind of money, they think they own the world. I laughed softly. Maybe some of them do. That night, she talked more than she ate about power, negotiations, and how she'd one day be on the other side of the table, giving orders instead of taking them. I listened, amused because I'd sat at that exact table for 40 years. I'd given those orders, watched people like her scramble to impress, to belong, to be seen. But there was something in her that reminded me of who I once was: hungry, impatient, alive. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other often. Dinner at Chonkat, coffee at Pavilion, quiet walks through the park under the glowing towers. She said I had a calming presence. I said she had fire in her eyes. She laughed and told me I should write poetry instead of living alone. Elena was different from the women I'd known in New York. She wasn't chasing luxury. She was chasing validation. In her world, every success was a trophy to prove she wasn't just another consultant. She told me about the men she worked with: arrogant, loud, shallow. They think money is intelligence, she said. But most of them are just lucky. Luck is a currency too, I said. It just runs out faster. She tilted her head, curious. You sound like someone who's lost a lot. Maybe I have, I said. But I also learned what's worth keeping. We were two people at different ends of the same road. She was sprinting toward the world I had already escaped. Sometimes I wondered what she'd think if she knew the truth, that the quiet man who ordered Tatarik and carried her shopping bags was the same Paul Warren who once moved markets. The same man whose hidden holdings still controlled a company her entire career now depended on. But I didn't tell her. Not yet. There was something peaceful in her not knowing, something honest about being seen without the armor of power that I remember one afternoon. We were sitting by the fountain at KLCC Park. The air smelled like rain. She leaned back and said, You know, Paul, I can't imagine you ever being in finance. You're too calm. Too ordinary. I smiled. Ordinary's not such a bad thing. She laughed. No, but it's not exciting. Her words didn't sting, but they lingered. I'd spent my whole life being anything but ordinary, and yet here she was admiring everything I was pretending to be. That night, I sat by the window of my condo, looking at the city lights reflecting off the towers. The world below me buzzed with energy, people chasing, bargaining, surviving. I once thought that was life. Now I realized it was noise. Still, a part of me missed the weight of command, the sharpness that came from being needed. Maybe that's why I let her stay in my life. She made me feel seen, even if it was for the wrong reasons. Weeks passed, and our dinners became a routine. She'd talk endlessly about her upcoming presentation, the power brokers she met, the big boys at Harmony Holdings. Every time she said the company's name, I felt a flicker of irony. She had no idea that I was still the silent majority shareholder, that the deal she worshipped would soon cross my desk for approval. Once, she asked me what I used to do in America. I worked in finance, I said. Like consulting? Something like that, I replied. Did you make good money? She asked, and I smiled. Enough to retire early. She laughed. I hope I can say that someday. There was no arrogance in her tone, just innocence, the kind of blindness that comes with ambition. She believed she was climbing, never realizing she was already standing in front of the mountain's owner. As we walked home that night, she linked her arm through mine. You're different, Paul, she said softly. You listen. You don't try to impress anyone. I looked at her and smiled. That's because I've already played that game. She didn't understand what I meant, and I didn't explain. Some truths are better revealed in their own time. Back in my condo, I poured myself a drink and opened my laptop. The Harmony Holdings logo glowed faintly on the screen. My board reports were waiting. Merger updates, cash flows, compliance issues. Elena's firm was right there, listed under acquisition advisory partner. Her name appeared 3 times that I closed the file slowly. There was something poetic about the universe's timing, that out of all the cities in the world, out of all the people I could meet, fate had introduced me to the one woman whose success depended on a company she believed was ruled by men she'd never meet. Men like me. I raised my glass to the skyline. To invisibility, I said quietly. It's the most powerful position I've ever had. The invitation came on a Thursday afternoon. Elena messaged me a photo of a gold-edged card, embossed with the words Harmony Holdings, Merger Celebration Reception. Beneath it, in her neat, confident handwriting, "Come with me. You'll see what I actually do." I hesitated. For weeks, I'd been content to stay invisible, listening to her stories without revealing how much of them I already knew. But something about that night, that rooftop bar, called to me. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I wanted to see how far she'd go before she tripped over her own pride. The bar sat on the 56th floor of a luxury hotel overlooking the Petronas Towers. The kind of place where everyone's handshake measured net worth and every smile hid an agenda. When I arrived, I felt immediately out of place. My navy blazer was modest, the kind of thing you buy once and keep for a decade. Around me were suits tailored within an inch of arrogance. Italian wool, slick hair, champagne laughter. I could almost hear the mental currency exchanging between glances. Elena stood near the center of it all, radiant in a red silk dress. Her hair was swept back, her posture effortless. She saw me, and her smile widened, but it wasn't warmth. It was the kind of smile you give to a secret you hope no one notices. "Paul, you made it," she said, kissing my cheek lightly. Her perfume carried notes of jasmine and ambition. "You invited me," I said. I couldn't say no. She laughed, turning to introduce me to a group of her colleagues. "This is Paul," she said casually. "A friend. He's retired." The pause before the word retired was deliberate, a small knife disguised as a compliment. I nodded, offering a polite smile as her co-workers shook my hand with polite disinterest. To them, I was invisible, the older foreigner who'd been lucky enough to find company in a younger, successful woman. Point one of the men, slick hair, loud laugh, said, "Elena's got a soft spot for charming retirees." "You must have some stories, Paul." "About a few," I replied. "Most of them about patience." They laughed politely, then turned back to their own conversations about profit margins and champagne bonuses. I didn't mind. I'd been underestimated my entire career, sometimes by enemies, sometimes by allies. Tonight, it just came from someone I thought might care. As the evening stretched, the champagne flowed faster. The skyline glittered through the glass walls, reflecting back 100 tiny versions of everyone's vanity. Elena was in her element, laughing, networking, charming her way through the room like a woman born to command attention. Then came the moment that would anchor itself in my memory. Someone proposed a toast, a senior executive from her firm, raising his glass high. To success, to youth, and to the courage it takes to win big. The crowd cheered, glasses clinking. Elena, slightly flushed from the wine, grinned and added, "And to the men who can still keep up with us." A few eyes turned toward me. The laughter rippled, harmless at first. But Elena wasn't done. She picked up a half-full glass of red wine and said, "Careful, everyone. Don't spill any. This bottle costs more than Paul's pension." Before I could react, she tilted her hand. A small, deliberate flick, and a streak of crimson splashed onto my sleeve. The crowd erupted in laughter. Someone joked, "Guess you'll need a new blazer, Paul." I stood there, the wine spreading like a bruise on the fabric, the air thick with amusement. Elena laughed the loudest. For a second, I saw myself reflected in the glass wall behind her. An old man, humiliated, smiling politely to preserve the comfort of others. I dabbed the stain with a napkin, my movements slow, measured. "Good wine," I said softly. "I'll remember it." Her laughter faltered for half a heartbeat, as if she'd caught something in my tone. But then she brushed it off, turning to refill her glass. The rest of the night passed in a blur of noise and self-congratulation. I drifted between conversations, invisible again, watching her command attention with the same hunger I once had. Later, as the crowd thinned, Elena found me by the balcony, where the warm air carried faint traces of rain. "You're quiet tonight," she said, sipping her wine. "I'm just observing," I replied. "Don't take the joke too seriously, Paul. You know how these things are." I smiled faintly. Duh. I've been in a few rooms like this before." She leaned against the railing, the city lights dancing in her eyes. "You'd be surprised," she said, "how many men here think they're untouchable. Harmony Holdings, for example, they're beasts. billion-dollar egos. I'm closing a $700 million merger with them next week. She said it proudly, expecting awed. I looked out over the city, the towers gleaming like twin sentinels of irony. That's impressive, I said. It's the biggest deal of my career, she continued. Once it's signed, I'll be on every list that matters. I turned to her. And what will that give you? She frowned. What do you mean? When you're on every list? When everyone knows your name? What happens then? She blinked, then laughed lightly. Then I'll finally be where I belong. I nodded slowly, as if agreeing. But inside, something shifted, a small, silent current pulling me back toward the world I had left behind. When she went to mingle again, I stepped aside and pulled out my phone. The city below was alive, headlights streaming like veins of light through the streets. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years that a woman's voice answered on the second ring. Harmony Holdings, Executive Office, New York. Put me through to Richard, I said. May I ask who's calling? Tell him it's Paul Warren. There was a pause, then a breathless, Mr. Warren, we thought you'd retired? Yes, I said, but retirement gets dull. I need a favor. Moments later, Richard's familiar voice filled my ear. Paul, my God, where have you been hiding? In plain sight, I said. I need the Malaysia file. The merger your team's overseeing. I want full visibility. Everything on the advisory side. Names, partners, contracts. There was silence, then a careful tone. Understood. May I ask why? I looked back into the bar. Elena was laughing again, surrounded by people who adored her performance. Because, I said quietly, I think someone's about to teach me what happens when pride forgets who signs the checks. I ended the call and slipped my phone in my pocket. When I turned back, Elena was waving at me from across the room, her smile radiant, unbothered, beautiful in the way only ignorance could be done. I smiled back, the kind of smile that hides a storm behind calm water. She thought she'd met a man with nothing left to lose, but she was wrong. I hadn't lost my power. I just learned how to use it in silence. The morning after the rooftop party, I woke to the sound of rain tapping against my balcony glass. The city was washed in silver, the Petronas Towers half shrouded in mist. I sat with my coffee, staring out over Kuala Lumpur, feeling that old familiar hum return, the quiet vibration that comes when you know something's about to change. For years, I had kept my distance from the world I built, the endless calls, the boardrooms, the balance sheets stacked like lies. I had buried that part of myself under the polite facade of a retiree. But Elena's wine, her laughter, her arrogance, they had cracked something open. I turned on my phone and saw an encrypted message from New York. Richard had been efficient, as always. Attached were 3 files, marked Harmony Holdings, Malaysia Division, Advisory Partner Review. I downloaded them, scanning through the names, contracts, and strategy notes. And there it was, Elena's firm, listed as the lead consultant for the merger integration. She wasn't just part of the deal. She was driving it. 2 hours later, I called my old driver, Amir, and asked him to take me to Damansara Heights. Most people thought Harmony's Southeast Asia office didn't exist, that everything ran out of Singapore. That was intentional. We had a small, discreet command center here, tucked inside a glass building with no signboard, no public listing. I'd chosen it years ago precisely for this reason, to be invisible when needed. When I walked through those doors, the young receptionist froze. The last time she'd seen me was on a wall-sized portrait in the CEO's gallery in New York. Mr. Warren, she stammered. We didn't know you were. Don't worry, I said. I'm just visiting. Inside, I met with Raymond, my regional director, sharp suit, sharper mind. He was loyal, and more importantly, discreet. Sir, it's an honor, he said, shaking my hand. We didn't expect, neither did I interrupted. I need to review the merger files personally. He led me to the conference room, a minimalist glass box overlooking the city. The documents were already waiting on the screen. The first thing I noticed was how aggressive the plan was. Elena's firm had proposed a post-merger efficiency model, which was corporate language for mass layoffs. Nearly 700 Malaysian workers were scheduled to be terminated within 3 months of the deal signing. The plan would shift the work to Singapore for cost optimization, effectively gutting the local branch. My stomach tightened. I'd built Harmony differently. We had always prided ourselves on balancing profit with ethics. But now the vultures had found a way in. Raymond said quietly, "Sir, the advisory firm is pushing this angle hard. The lead negotiator, Ms. Elena Lee, I know who she is," I said. He hesitated. "We assumed she was operating under your awareness." "She isn't," I said flatly. "Not yet." I leaned back, staring at the projected numbers. Neat columns of data hiding lives, families, and homes behind them. That's the thing about power. From the top, destruction always looks efficient. "Keep the proposal unchanged," I said finally. "Don't reject it. Don't alter a single word. I'll handle it." Raymond nodded, confused but obedient. "Understood, sir." When I left the building, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, heavy with the scent of wet earth. I walked to the car slowly, feeling my pulse calm, my purpose returning to it had been years since I felt this alive. That night, Elena called. Her voice was bright, distracted. "Sorry I've been busy lately," she said. "We're in final rounds with Harmony. It's chaos, but the good kind." I smiled to myself. "I can imagine. You'd be bored out of your mind in these meetings," she laughed. "A lot of suits talking in circles, pretending to matter." "I used to be one of those suits," I reminded her. "Yeah, but you're sweet," she teased. "Not like them. You're small in a good way." "Small." The word hung in the air like a crack in glass. I said nothing. She didn't notice. She was already telling me about a new restaurant she wanted to try, some Michelin-starred place where influencers took photos of their food before eating. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. I wasn't angry, just quietly certain of what needed to happen next. IT wasn't about revenge. Not in the way people imagine it. Not about punishment or rage. It was about truth. About showing her the mirrors she refused to face. Over the next week, I met quietly with my legal team, all under the radar. We reviewed every clause of the Harmony merger, every signature, every amendment, every document Elena had touched. I didn't change a thing. I just watched. Meanwhile, Elena's world seemed to grow louder. She was everywhere. Social dinners, press events, cocktail parties filled with men who promised her more doors, more chances, more power. When we met for dinner one night at a quiet restaurant near Bangsar, she arrived late. Phone in hand, mind elsewhere. "Sorry," she said, sliding into the seat opposite me. "Everything's exploding right now. The merger's going to finalize next month. Harmony is thrilled. You'll see me in the Edge soon." I smiled. "Congratulations." "You don't sound impressed," she teased. "I am," I said softly. "I'm just curious what it'll cost you." "What do you mean?" "Every deal takes something," I said. "Sometimes it's just money. Sometimes it's the part of yourself that remembers people matter more than numbers." She frowned. "You talk like an old professor." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I've just lived long enough to know that every empire collapses from the inside first." She didn't respond. Her phone buzzed, and she excused herself to take the call. I watched her silhouette against the window, framed by the city lights. A woman chasing the illusion of control, unaware she was already running inside a maze I designed. That night, when she dropped me off at my condo, she leaned over and kissed my cheek. "You're a good man, Paul," she said softly. "Don't change." I smiled as I stepped out. I won't. But I already had. The days that followed were quiet. I kept my distance from her, answering messages politely, but rarely meeting. Instead, I spent my time walking through the city again. The same streets I'd wandered when I first arrived, but everything looked different now. The market smells, the chatter, the flashing lights. They weren't a refuge anymore. They were reminders of the fragile balance between power and humility. From my balcony each night, I watched the Petronas Towers. They gleamed like twin swords, sharp and untouchable, a mirror of what I once was, and what she wanted to become. One evening, I stood there with a glass of wine, the same vintage she'd splashed on me. I'll let the memory play again, frame by frame. Her laughter, the sting, the quiet humiliation I had allowed myself to endure. But what she didn't understand, what she couldn't possibly see, was that power doesn't vanish when you hide it. It waits. It learns patience, and patience in the hands of someone who's already lost everything, becomes the sharpest weapon of all. I raise the glass and whisper to the city below. You wanted to play the game, Elena. Let's see how you handle the truth when the board flips. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was purpose that a quiet storm had begun to move inside me, steady and deliberate. Not destruction, not vengeance, just revelation. And when it came, it would arrive as softly as rain, the kind that cleanses before it floods. The morning of the signing ceremony began like any other, sunlight spilling over the Petronas Towers, traffic snarling beneath them, the city shimmering in that in-between space between grace and chaos. I stood in front of the mirror of my Mandarin Oriental suite, adjusting a dark navy suit I hadn't worn in years. The fabric still held that quiet weight, the kind that comes from tailored authority. I ran a hand along my cufflink, engraved with the initials PW, a relic from another life that IT felt strange, stepping back into the world I had abandoned. But today wasn't about reclaiming it. It was about closing a circle. Downstairs, the five-star ballroom buzzed with the energy of power. Cameras, reporters, and executives in $1,000 suits filled the space. On a massive LED screen, the words glowed in gold. Harmony Holdings ex Arcturus Consulting, Strategic Southeast Asia Partnership, $700 million. That was Elena's firm that I arrived quietly, slipping into the back of the ballroom. No one noticed me. Not at first. It was almost poetic how invisibility had become my shield. And then I saw her. Elena stood at the center of it all, radiant in a scarlet dress that commanded attention. Her hair was swept into an elegant bun, her smile polished to perfection. She looked like she belonged in every headline that would follow. The woman who closed the deal of the year. She greeted board members, shook hands, posed for cameras. When her eyes found me across the room, she smiled warmly, almost affectionately. "Paul," she called, walking over. "You came. Wouldn't miss it," I said, returning the smile. She took my arm lightly. "This is the biggest day of my career. When it's done, I'll finally have my name in every paper that ever mattered." "You deserve it," I said quietly. She didn't hear the weight in my tone. She was already looking past me, scanning for journalists, investors, attention. The master of ceremonies began the introductions. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We are moments away from the official signing of the Harmony Arcturus strategic merger." People settled. The room dimmed slightly, the spotlight falling on the long mahogany table at the front of the ballroom. The senior team from Arcturus sat to one side, Elena among them, glowing with confidence. Then the MC continued. "Now, please welcome the chair of Harmony Holdings, Mr. Paul Warren." For a split second, the name didn't register. I could feel the confusion ripple through the crowd like static. Then the doors opened and I walked through slowly, every step echoing in the silence that followed. Heads turned, eyes widened, and then Elena saw me. Her smile froze. Her body stiffened. The glass of champagne in her hand trembled just slightly. Catching the light, I moved toward the head of the table, my expression calm, almost gentle. I could see her try to make sense of it, searching for an explanation that didn't exist. I stopped beside the Harmony delegation, nodded to the legal counsel, and took my seat at the center. "Good morning," I said, my voice carrying across the room. "Before we proceed with this $700 million partnership, I'd like to revisit a few ethical concerns." The executives straightened in their chairs. Cameras flashed, then stopped. The room felt smaller suddenly. Every sound sharpened. I turned slightly, not toward the crowd, but toward Elena. Her face was pale now, her eyes locked on mine. There was no more laughter, no flirtation, no pretense. Just the dawning horror of recognition. I continued, my tone measured. "Harmony Holdings has built its foundation not just on profit, but on integrity, a rare currency in today's markets." Yet, as we reviewed the merger documents, several details surfaced. Inconsistencies, clauses that would result in the termination of nearly 700 local workers, all in the name of efficiency. I let the words sink in. The air in the ballroom grew heavy. I turned toward the screen with a proposed strategy, her strategy, glowed in bold font. "This," I said softly, "isn't efficiency. It's extraction, and it has no place in the company I built." A whisper rippled across the room. Cameras pointed again, unsure whether to film or not. Elena's voice broke the silence, barely audible. "Paul." I looked at her, not with anger, but with that quiet clarity I'd practiced all my life. "You once told me the world belongs to those who can take it," I said. "But power isn't about taking, Elena. It's about knowing when to give." Her lips parted, but no words came. Her colleagues shifted uncomfortably beside her. Sensing the fracture they couldn't mend, one of the Arcturus partners leaned toward her. "Elena, you knew him?" he whispered. She didn't answer. I returned to the microphone. "Harmony will proceed with the merger," I said evenly, but under revised terms. "Every local job will be protected, every ethical clause enforced, and the advisory leadership will be reevaluated." That last word was deliberate. Elena understood it instantly. Her face drained of color. The sparkle in her eyes, the same one that had once lit up every dinner conversation, vanished, replaced by a hollow kind of disbelief. She pushed back her chair suddenly, the sound sharp against the marble floor. "Excuse me," she murmured, her voice shaking. She rose and walked quickly toward the exit, one trembling hand clutching her purse. No one stopped her. No one even breathed. The doors closed behind her with a soft click that echoed louder than anything else in the room. I turned back to the crowd, my tone calm once more. "Now," I said, "shall we proceed?" The signing went on in silence. Cameras recorded, but no one dared to speak above a whisper. When the papers were finally exchanged and the applause came, it was polite, restrained, uncertain. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, I stepped outside the ballroom onto the terrace overlooking KLCC Park. The afternoon light shimmered off the fountains, the towers casting long silver reflections. I took off my tie, loosened the collar, and breathed. Behind me, I heard quiet footsteps. Raymond appeared, holding a folder. "Sir," he said softly, "the press wants a comment." "Shall I tell them the deal stands?" I said. "Harmony honors its commitments." He hesitated. "And about Ms. Lee?" I looked out at the skyline. "Leave her out of it," I said quietly. "The lesson will find her without our help." Raymond nodded and left. I stood there a while longer, the wind soft against my face, the city alive beneath me. There was no triumph in me, no satisfaction, just a stillness, the kind that comes after a long storm finally breaks. She had mocked the man she thought was beneath her, not realizing he had built the empire she was climbing. But the truth wasn't revenge. It was release. When you spend decades surrounded by power, you learn the most dangerous thing isn't arrogance, it's blindness. And as the city lights began to flicker on, I whispered to myself, not in bitterness, but in peace, she'll understand one day. Not what she lost, but what she could have learned. I turned from the skyline, walking back into the quiet of the Mandarin Oriental halls. The circle had closed, and the man who vanished from Wall Street had finally come home. Not to wealth, not to glory, but to himself. For weeks, her name disappeared. The woman who once stood in every photo, every headline, every champagne-lit rooftop circle of Kuala Lumpur was suddenly a ghost. Elena Lee's fall from grace didn't come with flames or fury. It came with silence. Harmony Holdings went ahead with the revised merger. The newspapers printed a single line about a strategic leadership adjustment. Within 48 hours, Arcturus Consulting removed her biography from its website. Her phone stopped ringing. Her once buzzing WhatsApp groups, filled with powerful people she used to laugh and drink with, went quiet. One by one, the messages stopped being blue dash ticked by the third week. She'd stopped leaving her apartment. From her balcony in Mont Kiera, she could see the skyline, the same skyline she'd once dreamed of conquering. Now it mocked her, glittering like a city built on someone else's dreams. The red dress from the signing day hung in the corner of her wardrobe, still draped over a chair. A faint wine stain on the sleeve reminded her of the night she'd splashed Paul's arm, laughing, teasing him. She hadn't known, But ignorance didn't soften the truth. She had mocked the man who was the room, the quiet architect behind everything she thought she understood. That thought gnawed at her every night. That IT was 2 months before she saw him again. That IT happened on a late afternoon at a small cafe near Bukit Bintang, the kind of place she never used to visit. She'd come there to avoid familiar faces, the socialites, the ex-colleagues, the polite smiles that had gossip. She wore plain clothes now. No red lipstick, no diamond earrings. Just a white blouse and jeans. Her hair was tied back, and she looked 10 years older, though she wasn't yet 40 as she was staring into her coffee when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Mind if I join you?" Her hand froze. The spoon clinked against the cup. She turned. Paul stood there, no suit, no aura of wealth or power, just a man in a linen shirt, carrying 2 coffees. He looked the same. Calm, measured, the same steady presence that used to make her feel safe before it made her tremble. "Of course," she said quietly. He sat down, setting 1 cup before her. "Flat white," he said. "You still take 2 sugars?" She blinked. "You remember that?" He smiled faintly. "I remember most things." For a moment, neither spoke. The cafe's soft music filled the silence, mingling with the clatter of plates and quiet conversations. Finally, Elena exhaled. "You must think I'm pathetic." Paul shook his head. "No, just human." She looked at him sharply. "You humiliated me." "No," he said gently. "You did that to yourself." The words weren't cruel. They were simply true. She swallowed hard, her eyes wet. "You could have told me who you were, and you would have treated me differently," he said. "That's exactly why I didn't." Her throat tightened. "You wanted me to fail. I wanted you to see," he said softly. "There's a difference." She stared down at her hands. "You don't know what it's like being a woman in that world. You have to be sharper, louder, harder just to stay in a room." "I know," he said quietly. "That world took pieces from everyone, me included. But there's a line between strength and cruelty. You crossed it without realizing you were already standing on my floor." Elena flinked. "I never meant to hurt you." He studied her for a long moment. "You didn't. You just reminded me what happens when power forgets humility." She blinked back tears. "And now, what happens to me?" Paul leaned back, his expression unreadable. "That's not my question to answer. But maybe it's your first chance to start without pretending." For a long while, they sat in silence. She wanted to ask him for help, for a second chance, a job, forgiveness, anything to fill the aching void. But she couldn't bring herself to dot. He sipped his coffee. "You know," he said finally, "I've seen people lose millions and bounce back stronger. But the ones who lose their reflection, they struggle to recover. You haven't lost your career, Elena. You've just met your mirror." She allowed a shaky breath. "And what do you see in it?" Paul's voice softened. "Someone who could still build something real, if she stops performing long enough to mean it." A tear slipped down her cheek. She laughed bitterly, wiping it away. "You make it sound easy." "It's never easy," he said, "but it's possible." When he stood to leave, she wanted to stop him, to apologize properly, to say something that might undo what she'd broken. But all she managed was, "Paul, thank you for not destroying me." He paused by the table, then said quietly, "You were never mine to destroy. You were your own undoing, and you can be your own redemption, too." And with that, he left. She watched him walk out into the golden Kuala Lumpur sunset, disappearing into the crowd of pedestrians crossing the street, just as he had appeared months before, quietly, without fanfare. For the first time in her adult life, Elena felt something unfamiliar. Not shame, not anger. Something smaller, more fragile than humility. In the weeks that followed, she began to rebuild. Not her career, but herself. She sold her designer handbags, canceled her club memberships, and moved into a smaller apartment in Taman Desa. The world she once ruled didn't notice. But for the first time, that didn't matter. She started volunteering, teaching young entrepreneurs how to pitch ethically, helping single mothers learn basic finance. It was small work, invisible work, but it gave her something her million-dollar contracts never had: peace. Sometimes, on her way home, she'd see the Twin Towers glowing in the distance. And she'd think of that night, The ballroom, the silence, the moment her world cracked open. She no longer hated IT in some strange way. It had saved her. Months later, she received a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single handwritten note: "We all wear masks. The lucky ones are those who learn to live without them. PW." Beneath, it was a small Harmony Foundation business card, an invitation to join their ethics board for Southeast Asia. Elena stared at it for a long time. Then, for the first time in months, she smiled. Not the confident, camera-ready smile the city once knew, but a quiet, genuine one because she finally understood what he had meant that day in the cafe. Power wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing clearly, even when the reflection hurt.